So first off, I want to say thank you for coming to this session. I know that the after lunchtime bodes naps. And so I appreciate that you all are sticking to the agenda and you came. That's wonderful. In my day job, I teach undergraduates. So having a room full of people who are happy to be here is kind of nice. All right, as a few people come filtering in and get seated, let me just do a brief introduction. My name is Jennifer Schultz. I am a psychotherapist by trade. I worked for a number of years for an agency that provided out-of-home care to children and families with mental health issues out in Pennsylvania. I often said my job there as a therapist was to teach parents how to parent the kid that they got, as opposed to the kid that they maybe hoped that they were going to have. And I think that might resonate with a few of you in this room. After doing that, my husband and I became foster parents ourselves, and we have two now grown adult children who we adopted from care. And around the time that we were raising them, I decided I needed to make a little career switch. And so I've been teaching psychology at Marian University of Wisconsin for about the past 15 years, just up in Fond du Lac. So I think when I do presentations like this, I try really hard to bridge kind of what I do as an academic, right, studying some of this now, but also with my own experience as a parent and a caseworker and just a person. And so I hope we're going to do a nice job of blending those two. I'd like to hear a little bit about you all, though, because when I put this presentation together, typically I do this for foster parents and adoptive parents. And when I looked on Whova, that was not the match that I was seeing for a lot of you. So I know we have some professionals in the room. And if just a few of you would be willing to share kind of what it is you're going to hope that I tell you today so that I can keep those questions in the back of my head. Oh, this is just like class.
So I'm a CCF service facilitator up in Dunn County, and so I'm hoping to learn today. I have a lot of youth that I work with,
Okay.
And a lot of, I don't want to say challenging, but they have their parents are at a point of frustration, or they just don't know what to do. So I was kind of hoping to learn some different tools or skills that I can kind of wrap around not only my consumer, but their family as well.
Okay, and so I'm going to repeat that because they're recording. So I have a CCS worker, and just by show of hands, how many of you are CCS involved? Okay, and so kind of hoping to come with some maybe strategies, tools to use for some of the families that she works with. I say maybe mom and dad are frustrated because the kids aren't showing some resilience. Okay. Okay. Other? Yes. Okay.
But also we've adopted out of foster care. Okay. And I'm intrigued with how to help the mamas whose children I'm taking in as a foster parent, but also our adopted daughter, Rachel Alcohol, how to help her as well.
Okay, so that parent perspective, this woman is a foster parent, so working with maybe the foster children, their biological families, as well as her own adopted children. Okay. All right, you got to represent on this half of the room. Yes?
I would say my husband and I are guardians for
Okay.
a little guy that has trauma.
Okay.
And so just, my kids are older, out of the home already. So we're parenting in a whole different kind of trauma
Sure.
for us. And just learning how to build that resiliency now as we're starting out in a different kind of parenting journey.
Mm-hmm.
And how to build that resiliency, not only for him, but also my adult children. There's some dynamics.
Okay. All right, so a foster mom who is talking about kind of coming at this maybe the second time around and maybe having to parent a little differently, right? Parent the kid that showed up in your house versus the one, maybe the ones you raised the first time around. Okay, so skills, yep.
I'm developing a caregiver retreat program,
Okay.
different lengths. But I'm also a parent of a son who's now 15 on the autism spectrum. But I'm kind of here at the conference in general and this session in general to learn more, a little bit more about some other perspectives, some other challenges. I know what challenges I've had, but what other challenges I would want to be sensitive to in our caregiver retreat or
Okay.
our caregiver experience.
Very good. So somebody putting together a caregiver retreat who wants to hear about other people's challenges. I really appreciate that, because a lot of times we go into it kind of thinking we know, right? I know what these challenges are, but everybody's challenges are different. So thank you for doing that. Right? And I guess if you want to go to the caregiver retreat, right, make friends with the lady in the back. Right. Well, please stop throughout. I want this to be a time where we ask questions. There's a lot of experience. I would be willing to bet that I am not the only person in this room who knows a little something about resilience. I think you all know too. I want us to share examples. I want us to share applications. Never in my 15 years of teaching has a student ever filled out a course eval and said, I just loved listening to Schultz's voice so much, right? So please, I want to hear your voices as well. It's just a lot more fun for all of us. I will say that this training is well, here's our learning objectives. I want to speak briefly about creating safety in relationship, in part because what we're doing today is a kind of a bit of a larger presentation I've done talking to parents of traumatized kids and how to do trauma-informed parenting. And I took out all of that stuff because of time, but I do want us to spend a moment on safety in relationships, because I think that that really is the foundation of everything that we're doing. And then we're going to define what is resilience and then talk about strategies for resilient parenting. So creating safety in relationship. One thing I really want to take away, or have you all take away, is that relationship, whether you're a professional working in CCS or early intervention or as a therapist, whether you're a foster parent, adoptive parent, a sister, a daughter, a spouse, a sibling, all of those good things, relationship really sits at the foundation of change in my mind, right? That's kind of if you had to sum up counseling in a sentence or two for me, I would say it's all about the relationship. It doesn't matter how smart I am, how many certifications I have, how long I spent in school, but if I don't have a relationship with somebody, we're not going to get very far. And I think we probably recognize that as parents, right? Sometimes, do we have moments where we like our kids a whole lot? Are they easier to parent then, right? And do we have moments where they're not our favorite people in the world, right? Where we remind ourselves that I love you, but I'm not really liking you a whole lot right now. And when we come at any kind of behavior change from that place, when the relationship isn't good, it doesn't work so well, does it? And so something I always try to remember, and I brought my dear husband with me today, something we kind of remind one another is, do you want to be right or do you want to be in relationship? And sometimes and that is not our phrase. We are not that smart that we came up with that. Somebody else did. But it's just a really nice thing to keep in the back of your head. Like, am I staying in relationship with this person? And I will say, in the relationship we have with our two adopted kids, both of them came with histories of trauma. One of them struggled a bit more. Our older daughter struggled with that a bit more than our younger son. But until we started focusing on the relationship that we had with them, none of the stuff we were trying to do to get behavior to change was very effective. So try to remember that in your work, that relationship and connection is important. It is those, think about having a boss that you really like. Would you do anything for that boss? Right? Maybe not anything, but right? We work happier for people that care about us and we care about them, and when the relationship is good. And in order to have that relationship, we have to have that feeling of safety. So some of you have probably seen this before if you've taken like a human development class or a trauma class. For young kids, they go through what's this attachment cycle. And that's just the cycle that we go through all day long when think about a young baby, right? We start in this corner up here where they have a need. What's something that babies need from us? I heard food, right? When babies get hungry, they have a need. And what happens when they get hungry? Yeah, they get aroused. And so they start to do things like cry. Maybe they kind of kick their little legs a little bit. Maybe they kind of turn beet red, right? You kind of can see in their bodies that they need that. And so then our job as the caregiver is to gratify that need in some way. Right? So we see that they're starting to cry. We might look at our watch, go, oh, yep, it's been that much time. It's time for you to have something to eat. or oh, you're tired, you kind of know. You start going through that process of doing all the things to make the baby cry. And as we're doing that, we're building trust with that baby, right? That baby signals, hey, when I need things, this person comes and does these things for me, and I can trust them. And so many of our kids have that from birth. Our kids who have experienced trauma might not have. And so we end up going through this cycle with them, sometimes as basic as feeding, sometimes in other ways. When I think about when my son first came to live with us, he was about 4 years old. And one of the things we inadvertently did that was really smart was we put him in swim lessons. And when you're 4 years old, you have to do swim lessons with another person, right? You have an adult, a mom or a dad, in that pool with you. And so we wound up going through this cycle. So there's this little guy, big old head full of curly hair, standing on the side of the pool. He's, all right, the teacher says jump in. And so what do you think he's feeling in his little body? All that arousal, right? Like, is that water cold? Is the water deep? Is somebody going to catch me? What's going to happen? And he jumps in, and lo and behold, Dad catches him. And they did this over and over and over and over again. And I think that's really where he attached to my husband, was going through this process of, it's scary to jump in the water, but Dad's going to catch me. And then he figured out that all those other scary things that happen in life, Dad was going to help him too. So this is how we create safety. And so many of you are doing that with your kids already. Can any of the parents think of an example where they're doing this with their kids? Mm-hmm.
We had a situation where he was totally afraid of going in a Ferris wheel. He would have never did it.
Okay.
This summer, he did it.
Mm-hmm.
And the fun part was when we got up there, he got up about the third tier, they're stopping and starting. He says, I think I made a mistake. But he went through it.
Yeah, got through it. So the example was getting on a Ferris wheel. And that is a scare. I'm scared just thinking about it, right? And getting up to that third tier, and maybe I didn't make such a great choice, right? Maybe I shouldn't have done this, and yet you still have the whole rest of the Ferris wheel to go. But I'm guessing you were with him, and so that presence helped him conquer that situation. And again, if you've taken Psych 101, you've seen this. I think it's just important to remember that when we are trying to build resilience, when we are trying to ask our kids to tap into those coping skills or develop a new skill or do something they've never done before, just remembering that, again, part of that safety foundation is making sure they have those basic needs met. And we'll talk about that again a little bit later in the presentation. So I want to skip forward a little bit to get into resilience because I'm watching time. So before I define resilience for you, what do you think of when you think of resilience?
Being able to bounce back.
Okay, so being able to bounce back. Strong.
To overcome or move past.
Overcoming or moving past. Did I see another? Changing your perspective. I like that. Tell me a little why you said that one.
I feel like a lot of, so I'm a coach leader, representing of families, but we do a lot of talking with parents about acknowledging like the struggles that they are having, but then noticing what is like good going on in their life.
Okay.
Being able to look at the bigger picture, what you could be doing well, although a lot of things are going on.
Okay, so I have to sum that up, and that was a lot of good stuff. Seeing the good, okay. But I like that part about challenging that you put in there, because I don't think anyone was wrong in their definition, but how many of us, when we think of resilience, right, you think about overcoming and coming over the mountain. And I think sometimes recognizing the mountain, right, and kind of seeing, well, maybe if we don't go over the mountain, what is this other thing that we could do? And that's kind of what I was hearing in your answer, is not just you overcome this thing, but you just maybe learn to do something different, and that's good.
A little bit like that sometimes recognizing that sometimes good enough is good enough. Perfection is not necessary. So that I'm not going to try it because I'm not going to. I'm not saying just there's good
good enough, and I love good enough. I am old enough, some of you in the room might be as well. There was a really kind of one of the classics in the parenting. I think it was Bruno Bettelheim who talked about good enough parenting. And that idea that you don't have to be perfect, you have to be good enough. And how many, right, as foster parents or adoptive parents, if you ever spend time on online forums, sometimes there's a lot of celebration of that, like, right, you fed your kids today. It doesn't matter what it was, like, we don't care that it was McDonald's. You fed them, and they ate, and they stayed alive, and right, kind of celebrating that good enough. Not every day has to be Pinterest-worthy.
From the autism perspective, I would say sustaining.
Mm-hmm.
One day you might have had a really, really rough day as a parent, well, the child too.
Mm-hmm.
But that's no assurance that like tomorrow's going to be better. Like
Sure.
learning that, yep, and tomorrow might be just like this, or tomorrow might be worse,
Mm-hmm.
or and just having that. To me, that's what resilience means. Just always being ready to. So it's kind of been said, but maybe a little bit.
No, but I'm glad that we're keeping those things in there, right? The idea of sustaining and maintaining and the status quo, and that we don't have to figure it all out in one day. And I want those ideas of resilience to come through too, because it takes strength to do that, right? It takes something, you have to overcome maybe your ideas of what life was going to be like. So those are all ideas about resilience to me. Friday night, we were having dinner with good friends, and my good friend and I were talking, and we're both moms to 20-year-old boys, which has a whole bit of challenges in and of itself. A lot of our conversation is around what thing did they do this week that we thought we taught them not to do. And so then she starts talking about resilience. She goes, I just hate that word so much. It just implies that you have to be strong and get through everything and kind of push down the hard stuff. And I laughed, and she asked why you're laughing, and I said, well, so on Monday I'm speaking at a conference, and my topic is resilience. So now I'm really rethinking all my life choices. Thanks, Sarah. But I love, and that's kind of what gave me the idea to talk about some of those definitions so that we acknowledge that resilience isn't just being strong, but it's also getting through the day. It's also maybe acknowledging when we don't want to climb that mountain, right? Sometimes being resilient means I'm not going to do that thing. I am going to quit the team or not finish that thing that I started because it's not what's right for me. Sometimes it means sitting in our feelings and acknowledging that we're just really sad, and it doesn't mean getting up and pretending like we're not sad. Sometimes it means spending the day just feeling our feelings. So remember those definitions. The APA definition that we'll use for today is what psychologists, when they study resilience, they're talking about the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And I just included a few of those sources there. I think we can probably come up with a pretty good list of the things that we need to be resilient in the face of in our lives. And what I probably should have made it bigger, because I want to point out that resilience often involves personal growth. Right? Think about in your own lives, going through something difficult, getting through that, and the skills and the growth and whatever, and the things that you took with you after that experience. So we want to see resilience as a way of having our own growth. So the meat of what we're going to talk about are those factors that enhance resilience. And so I'm going to go through various sets of factors, and it's going to be another opportunity to kind of stop and think about what are you doing in your house to promote this factor, or what could you start doing in your house that could promote that? And so if you jot anything down or write that down, I think that's the important stuff for you to write down today. So first of all, resilient adults tend to help create resilient children. And that doesn't just have to be their parents or their foster parents, but having the presence of other people in your life. There's a resilience questionnaire that I have used at times, and I had posted it somewhere. It's out there somewhere on Whova with materials that we posted. And it's a 14-question little quiz, and 8 of them have to do with the relationships that you had in your life. So that's mother, father, extended family, neighbors or friends, teachers, coaches, youth leaders, kind of all those people, okay? So having resilient adults in your life helps you to become resilient. So when you're working with maybe some of those challenging parents, right, help think of the ways that they're showing resilience and how they've shown that for their kids. So resilient adults can do 3 things. They know how to solve problems, and I'd be willing to bet that if you think about some of the adults in your life who are particularly resilient, right, they've learned some problem-solving skills, sometimes ways that we think are great, and sometimes we have to realize they're doing the best they can. But some of the most resilient people I've seen have come up with some really creative solutions to some really horrific problems. So knowing how to solve problems, they have healthy relationships with other adults, and they build healthy relationships in their families. And some of this might be the stuff that we don't even think about, but we're teaching our kids all the time. Right? When we're solving problems, how are our kids seeing us solve those problems? Right? That 20-year-old son of mine, he's pretty sharp. And just last night, he comes in and he says something, and I suspect there was a little bit of this going on between my husband. It was probably after dinner, right? And somebody had to clean up, and we didn't know who that was going to be, and there were other things going on. And he said something about how, and then he and his girlfriend walk in, and we're kind of doing this, and then they did it. That's what happened. They did it to one another. And my husband and I kind of laugh, like, oh, look at the example we're setting. And he goes, no, it's a good example, because you guys just kind of get that stuff out, and then you move on, and it's okay. And so it was kind of his way of seeing, right, our problem solving is to maybe make a joke, tease a little, but then we solve the problem and we move on. And so we've been showing him that all this time. I would never have said my parenting strategy is that I'm gonna no, that's not the parenting strategy. But they see in what we're doing. So when you're faced with a hard situation, how do you talk about it? Do you go, oh, not again, right? Or, all right, this thing happened, we're gonna have to get on with it, right? How do they see you handling those challenges helps them to build resilience. Seeing you have those healthy relationships is important. I'll stop here to think about self-care, right? Resilient adults take care of themselves. So usually I have people do this as an activity, but we're a little bit big of a group. But right now, I want you to jot down in your notes the answer to these 2 questions, right? When do you know it's time to take a break? And then what do you do to recharge? And then maybe the third answer to that is, how do you make that clear to the young person in your life that healthy adults take breaks and they walk away? The second group of factors that enhance resilience are support from caring adults and feeling safe in your home, your school, and your community. And remember, safety isn't just about feeling physically safe, it's also about feeling emotionally safe, feeling that you're valued in your home and in your school and in your community. I did this presentation once for a group of foster parents and kind of said, well, how do kids feel safe in your house? And one of the dads in the back kind of raises his hand and he goes, well, I'm a hunter and I got guns. Yes, your kids are probably physically safe. Let's talk about emotional safety, right? And maybe that does make them feel safe. Maybe that makes them feel unsafe, right? Maybe it's, all the other things that you do. but feeling emotionally safe. So support from caring adults looks like adults who listen and respond in a patient and supportive manner, validating your feelings. And that validating and agreeing are different. Right? When I agree with your feelings, I say, yes, that is totally the appropriate feeling to have in this situation. When I am validating your feelings, I am accepting you feel this way in this moment. Right? And it's very different. I think a lot of times as adults, kids come to them, right? Maybe they're talking about something that's going on at school, and my friend picked on me, and then I did this, and they did that, and we spend a lot of time, oh, don't feel that way, or you shouldn't be angry, or don't be upset, when what we should be saying is, that probably felt really lousy. Tell me more about that, right? Think about kind of the times in your life when you've had a bad day. Would you prefer somebody tell you not to feel bad about your bad day and tell you all the ways that you can solve it? Or would you like them to first acknowledge that you've had a bad day, and then when you're ready, talk about the ways you could solve it? Right, that difference. And it can be hard to do with kids. I think a lot of times we put on our adult lens and we look at the situation through the adult perspective without remembering that we should look at it through a kid's perspective. One of my first jobs out of undergrad was working with kindergartners. And I don't know if you know this, but the worst thing that can happen in kindergarten is when your friend doesn't invite you to their birthday party. Right? That's a huge thing. And it does not matter that birthday party isn't until, it's 10 months from now. And we know that the guest list is going to change every single day between now and that party. Right, the parents don't know yet where the party is going to be, right, or all the fun that's planned, but it's, you can't come to my birthday party. And how do you think it feels to be a 5-year-old and be told, you're not coming to my birthday party? It really is the worst thing in the world, and yet we're kind of, as adults, kind of like, right, we know better, right? I can't rationalize with that 5-year-old and say, you know what, just give it time, you'll be at the party, right? No, you have to stop for a minute and say, that's really sad. You're really sad about that. I would be really sad too if my friend said something that hurt my feelings. And then, you let them talk about being sad, and then you say, well, what do you think we could do to fix it? Right? They're way more receptive to the what you could do to fix it part after you've acknowledged those little feelings, right? I can't take my middle-aged lady feelings and apply them to a 5-year-old, right? Like, that's a big deal for that 5-year-old. Right? So sometimes just having those adults who stop and validate how you feel. Paying attention to their emotional needs. So understanding those times of day when a kid is struggling. Understanding their rhythms and their cycles. How many of you have a kid who is hangry? I'm not seeing I'm like, you all are a blessed group. Right, when those kids are hangry and kind of knowing the trouble times for them, kind of being at the ready with a granola bar. I used to joke that when I picked my son up from middle school, I just kind of threw some food at him in the back seat, waited 10 minutes, and I'd have a human. But that's exactly kind of acknowledging those, paying attention to those emotional needs, the physical needs, so that they can, right? We'll talk about homework after you've had a granola bar, right? We'll talk about those things later. I think having a village, family, friends, neighbors, and that doesn't mean just us, but for our kids. So do they have adults in their lives who are not biologically required to love them? And I'm talking about neighbors or coaches or anybody, right? People who, they don't have to like you. They have no obligation to like you, but they do anyway because they see something special in you. That's really important, and that helps build our resilience because it gives kids a resource that's maybe not mom or dad, right? Did you ever have some kind of problem in your life that you wanted to talk to an adult about, but you weren't quite ready to talk to mom and dad, right? It might be someone else. So for those of you who are caseworkers, right, that might be you, right? You might be that person who listens and validates and helps them face struggles. Who are some of the people that you can think of in your life? Sounds like sleigh bells, right? Maybe, right? It is after Halloween, after all. Who are some of the people in your lives that were kind of those extra adults who thought you were pretty cool?
People at church.
People at church. Okay, and what did they do to make you feel special?
They just asked me how I was or what was going on.
They just asked how I was or what was going on. That doesn't sound that complicated, right? What about that made it feel so good?
Well, they cared.
Yeah. They cared. And so, you don't have to like go to trainings and do all this special, right? Just asking a kid, how are you? Okay. Who else can think of somebody that helped provide that? Mm-hmm.
People who are just generally happy to see you. Kids can feel that.
Yeah.
Someone's generally happier
Yep.
than non-related.
Yeah, just being happy to see you. And again, how many of you can think of at least one kid that's not yours that you're happy to see, that you like, right? Yeah, there's some pretty awesome kids out there. So again, it doesn't take anything to show that kid that you're happy or to remember something about them, right? Kids are pretty awesome. How else do you think kind of support from caring adults can help contribute? Just listening, right? That power of listening. One of the classes I teach is an Intro to Clinical Counseling course, and that's actually the first thing we teach. We talk about the power of listening and how important that is, and we spend a lot of time practicing it. Because we all think we know how to do it, and some of us are pretty good at it, but to really listen is hard, especially when you're one of these kind of extra adults in a child's life. Because you might have a bunch of, it's easy to listen when you're a therapist and that's literally your job. It's a lot harder when you're trying to balance a bunch of things and it's carpool time and there's, another child, poking at you, right? That's when you really have to lean into your listening skills. So having these relationships, what this really does for us is when we're stressed out, stress has a way of making us want to isolate, doesn't it? Right? We kind of want to go home. We want to pull the covers up over our head and not talk to anybody. How many problems have we ever solved by doing that? Not too many, right? Occasionally you might come up with a great idea, but eventually you got to pull the covers off it and get going. And so stressors have this way of making us want to isolate. When we connect with other people, it helps us to feel less alone, right? Because maybe there is that person who listens and who might say, I've been in a similar situation. Would you like me to help? Or, gives you ideas for what you could do, or really just expresses that confidence that you'll figure it out. I think that's really, what can happen is they're not going to solve your problem for you, but you kind of know that this person is on your team. So think about the ways in which you can be that supportive adult. And then for those of you who have kids, think about who the supportive adults are in their lives and make sure they get lots of face time with those folks. This next one is a set. These next two are kind of big sets of things that we can do. So having a positive self-worth, that's something that we can't just wrap up in a bow and hand to somebody. But through all of these practices, right, by being available, by being with kids and supporting them, hopefully we help them develop a sense of positive self-worth and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is this idea that you are capable and can do things, believing you can be successful, and then being good at things. Right? Developing talents or skills are kind of how you develop that ability to move past something. So having an overall high self-esteem, self-worth. So what kind of messages are kids getting about their value? Are they getting a message that they can do hard things, or are they getting a message that that thing is too hard and I'll do it for you? And how hard is that as parents? How many times we just want to do it for them, right? Especially for our kids who have special needs or challenges, right? A lot of their life is really hard. And we want to make it easy for them wherever we can. And I'm not saying that's the wrong approach. But are we doing things for them that they should do for themselves and that will help them to really feel stronger and better. Okay? Losing track. So having an overall high self-esteem, believing you can be successful. How do we send kids messages that they are or are not capable? What are some examples of how you've done that? You do it before bed. Okay. Say more about that, please. Mm-hmm.
Messages and things of that nature. So every night when I would read my son a book, I would just tell him how smart he was, how capable he was. He makes mom so proud, and I'm so happy that I get to be his mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tell him that every night.
Right.
And so then whenever he's in trouble and like if a teacher says, "Oh, you're being naughty," he's like, "No, I'm not. I'm just correcting you on how I think things should be." And I'm like, so he's just very confident, and I feel like cultivated that within him because of that.
I love it. So talking about this kind of bedtime ritual and sending these positive messages about you're smart, you're capable, I love being your mom, kind of stuff. So helping build that and ending the day very peacefully. I like that. Mm-hmm. So sending that message again of, I don't like the way you're acting right now, but I still like you and I still love you, right, is being really important.
I think what I didn't realize until I looked at your slide that it says talents or skills, but whenever we take a placement, we try to encourage that kid, regardless of like gender or ability, to get involved in something. It doesn't have to be like a sport, and we get a lot of kids that are like, we're not good at anything, or it's like, okay, well, what do you want to try?
Yep.
And just get them involved in something.
Absolutely, get involved in something. We're all good at something, and I like that, it might be a sport. It might be Fortnite. You might be a really good video game player, but you can build up, right? What did it take to get good at Fortnite? Right? What did it take to be good at singing? Or what does it take to be a good artist or drawer? So yeah, developing those talents and skills is really important because it gives us opportunities to practice.
One thing I read once too was to say, I love watching you play, it may not even be a sport, maybe I love watching you play the piano. I love watching you play football, where the emphasis is on watching them enjoy themselves as opposed to be performance-based, because some kids aren't always adept at some of that.
Excellent. And do we only, so the advice is, right, I love watching you play. I love watching you do, and emphasizing the enjoyment in the activity versus mastery of it, because we don't all have to be good at everything, but we should keep doing it. And doing something just because it's fun is a great excuse to do it. Yep.
One of the things we've been trying, and we're just starting to do this, is to have him repeat back the positive affirmation in his own voice.
Mm-hmm.
And in front of the mirror, so that, we tell ourselves every day, like the status of our own being, and why not have it be a positive message?
Yep.
And so having him practice that to tell himself that I'm really intelligent, I'm good at sports,
Yep.
I love to read, all of those things.
I love it. So not just giving a positive affirmation to a child, but making them affirm themselves. Actually, one of the hardest things, we did an activity as a family once, and you had to give a family member compliments. And what we found in our kids is they could compliment other people, but they didn't like getting compliments. So having to say nice things about yourself is probably a real stretch for kids.
One of the things I do with our kids is having them give and do for others. I think,
Great.
Rather than just building your own skills and talents, helping others build theirs,
Mm-hmm.
and helping others find their place and their niche.
Yep. So acts of service for others, absolutely.
Service,
Yep.
whatever it might be. It could be just riding bike with the 4-year-old next door,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah. Again, it's part of how you build that village too. right? You realize that sometimes I help other people, sometimes people help me. Really great.
Also teaching him that in order to build that self-worth and self-esteem, you have to try things.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to fail.
Yep.
Tying your shoes, trying.
Yep. Yeah, self-esteem isn't, again, about the mastery. It's about the trying, right? Build that up as a person who tries new things. I love that you're not afraid to try new things. I love that when it didn't work out, you just did it again until you got it. Right? All that kind of stuff. I even, I have a niece who is 7, and I saw her a few weeks ago, and she totally ratted her and her sister out, told me all about the trouble that they got into on the bus that day, and everything that had gone wrong, and how scared she was, and she was sure she was going to be in trouble. Her parents had already handled it, right? I got to be auntie. I didn't have to be mom. And so I just said, did you know that when your dad and I and my sister, your aunt, do you know when we were little, we got in trouble too? And she, right? So sometimes just normalizing, right? All kids get in trouble. It doesn't mean you're a bad kid, right? We all got in trouble. We learned, and then we didn't do those things again. And then oh yes, and then what I learned. And then she ratted on her, and this is what Natalie had to learn. She really wanted to rat out her sister, but that's okay. So emphasizing those conversations, finding those moments to emphasize you are lovable and valuable all the time, and then really helping affirm their talents, their skills. And sometimes those can be hobbies, but don't forget talents and skills also is helping out around the house. So washing dishes is a skill, dishwasher, right? Giving kids those chores and responsibilities also helps develop their talents and skills and helps them to become resilient. So it's not just about doing fun things. All right, and then the other big group are teaching adaptive and flexible coping skills. We need to teach kids to interact in healthy ways. We need to teach them to manage their emotions, communicate their emotions, their needs, right? That's a pretty big group of things and is probably the crux of what we do as parents, right? Emphasizing healthy interactions and emotions. How do they, again, we kind of touched on this earlier, but what's their self-talk, right? How do they talk to themselves when things are hard? How do they talk about themselves? And helping challenge some of that self-talk. How do we view stress? So how do we as adults view these stressful things? Do we think it's all really, oh my God, you have to apply to colleges and that's going to be so stressful and so hard and I really hope you get in somewhere? Or, hey, it's time to start thinking about college. Maybe we should go look at some places. Let's help you find a place that fits because you have the knowledge in your head that there will be a fit for your child, right? If that's what they want to do, there will be a fit for them versus, oh my gosh, every kid has to go to the Ivy League. Right? How do you view those stresses? How do you view the hard things that have happened? Like, oh man, now we just another part on the car went, and I got to take it to the shop, and it's probably going to be $2,000 to fix, and it's Christmas time, and I don't want to deal with that. Or, okay, well, a car is just a thing, and we will fix it, and if that means Christmas is a little different this year, well, that's okay. Because we want to keep our car running so that we can continue to go to the places that we need to go, right? How do we view those things? So, sometimes at our house, we use a little bit of profanity. I apologize for that, people that might bother, but really sometimes, when your first reaction to something might be, oh, whatever. Think about, was that worthy of that, or was that really just a, oh, darn? Right, maybe we didn't, how are we reacting to those things? Some degree of stress or anxiety is normal in life, and it is essential for growth. So our kids need to experience stress, right? Anxiety is not always bad. We tend to define it as problematic, that the minute our kids are stressed or the minute a child is expressing anxiety, we want to fix it. And that's a pretty normal, natural, we want to fix things. We're fixers maybe by heart, by personality. But it's okay to sit in the anxiety. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to just kind of, that's a doozy. We're going to have to figure that one out and not rush to fix things. Anxiety is a normal and healthy function. It tells us something. Think about a time maybe that you felt anxious. Was it trying to tell you something, maybe about a person who wasn't good for you, or a situation you shouldn't be in? Or, maybe like yesterday afternoon about 2 o'clock when we were walking the dog, I started to think about giving this presentation and started to get maybe a little anxious because I didn't feel prepared. Well, that anxiety is what made me sit down at my desk and put the finishing touches on, right? So anxiety sometimes pushes us to do the thing that we need to do, and it's normal, and we shouldn't kind of be so quick to get rid of it. It's okay to feel that anxiety. Change is inherently stressful, even when positive. How many of you in this room are married and had a big wedding? Were you nervous before that big wedding or before getting married? Was it still a positive event? Hopefully for most of you, right? Right? So change, even good changes, right? Moving into a new house is stressful, but it's hopefully a positive thing because you're excited about being there. It's that when we face that anxiety and stretch and get past it, that we develop that strength and resilience, right? Nobody was ever super proud because they did something that they always knew how to do, right? When I get up in the morning and I get dressed, I'm not like, yay, I did it. But when you face something that you haven't done before, right? Maybe, for me, it might be doing a new recipe, and when my whole family says, oh, that was really good, yes, right? That's success. So when you do something that's hard and you overcome a challenge, that's when you can be really excited about something, and that's how you develop strength and resilience so that when you face a similar situation in the future, you can remember that you did it once before, right? That you've done hard things. Okay. So again, this is where we have to tamp down our temptation to fix things for kids, right? And again, it's a big temptation, right, people? Right? We just want to fix things. It's just easier sometimes if we do it. It's messier if they do it. When we step in and fix things for them, what message does that send? Right? That you can't do it. And if you get a message that you can't do it, how resilient are you going to be? You're going to keep waiting, right, for that knight in shining armor. When we are helicoptering, that's usually for our benefit, right, to make ourselves feel better when we have to resist that urge to helicopter and let the kid do the messy thing. So seeing stress as a positive or as an opportunity, and then how we face those stressors being important. We want to teach kids how to respond versus how to react. Give them time and space, right? And practice this phrase. That stinks, but you can handle it. Right? So again, coming back when they come in and they talk about the situation that happened at school and how am I ever going to do it, do that listening, do that validating, and say, yeah, that stinks. I think you can handle it. Would you like to come up with some ideas together for how you can handle it? Or would you like to practice what you can say to your friend? Now, I'm not saying that we stay hands-off in everything, right? If a kid comes home and they're talking about somebody hurting them, or if it's a situation where safety is at play, or somebody's doing something illegal, right? That's when we step in and say, well, what's happening is wrong, and I'm glad you told me about it, and here's what we're going to do to fix it, and here's the role I'm going to take to make sure it gets fixed as that person whose job it is to keep you safe. But when we're talking about, like, I have this paper coming up that I have to write, or I have a really big test, or I don't know if I'm going to make the soccer team, right? Those kinds of challenges, that's when we kind of stress and validate that those things are hard, but they've got the skills to do it. And it's whatever phrase, in our house, this stinks. In your house, it might be that sucks, or bummer, or, whew, that's a biggie, right? Whatever that language is that is natural and organic to you, and then, right, how can they handle it? Express that confidence that they can handle it. And then oftentimes, again, part of why kids are stressed is because they don't have our executive function that we have as adults. And so it might be, let's talk about how we can break this down into smaller steps for you. Right? What's one thing you can do today to get closer to that? Or what are the steps in doing that thing? So maybe it is, right, it's paper season in my life, so that's my example. Right? But what are the steps you need to take? Oh, well, first you have to decide what you want to write about. And then you're going to maybe get your sources, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do that. So let's make a checklist. And how many days do you think you need to do all of it, right? You help them do the planning. That's not helicoptering. That's modeling the problem solving, giving them the steps they need to do, and then handing it over to them to figure that out. You don't have to do the whole thing in one day. Can you think of ways that you've done this? Examples where you've broken things down, examples where you've done the hard step back and let them do it. Learning to tie shoes. Do you know that that is the hardest thing to learn? That's like the hardest of all your motor skills, learning how to tie your shoes. It like requires everything to work together. You got to have the brain that knows the steps. You got to have the fingers that can do the right things, and all while your mom's like, hurry up, we got to get out the door. Right? It is agonizing. It is agonizing to watch. Yep. That's why we have so many shoes with Velcro. But that's a good example of where we take away kids' resilience, right? We might get out the door sooner, but they're not learning the important skill. Yep.
One of the things that we've tried with our little guy is to do a schedule.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Like even when we're here at this conference, we sat down together and said, okay, from this time to this time, you're playing games, this time to this time is lunch, et cetera, et cetera. And we did the whole 2 days like that, laid it out.
Mm-hmm.
And then he sat down yet, and he took the pen and paper, and he's writing out his own schedule.
Love it.
I'm doing this at this time,
Time.
this at that.
Mm-hmm.
I told him, I said, I feel really good about this schedule. I think it's going to help us all
Mm-hmm.
feel better when we're away and you're here.
Yep.
And he's doing wonderful things.
That's wonderful, right? And again, it kind of puts him in control of his day, right? And again, that's a good resilient factor. I had a hand up here, and then I'll come back to the back room.
Having our 19-year-old daughter pay the water bill and waiting for our water to get turned off one of these months. It's very hard.
Okay, so they have put the 19-year-old in charge of the water bill. And does that mean she's got to like get the bill to the right place?
She just has to write out a check,
Okay. Okay, she's got to write a check for the water bill and get it in the mail. And
drop it off.
yep, and then your hope is that the water doesn't get turned off. But if it does, what's the plan?
We'll just deal with it when it happens.
Just deal with it when it happens. I love it.
It's hard to hang on.
It is hard. Isn't it hard to hang on? And again, the stakes get bigger as they get older, right? I mean, you know, that affects the whole family, the water. Yep. Go ahead.
Getting our son more involved in his IEP process.
Okay.
So I guess naturally they progress into post-secondary
Mm-hmm.
treatment plan. But we kind of pushed it up a little earlier, it's about a year and a half earlier, because he was really struggling and he kind of wanted to utilize his IEP as an excuse, you know,
Okay.
as a pressure to help him get out of
Mm-hmm.
having to do as much homework or what have you, but also wants to go into college. So, you know, having him a part of that whole equation
Mm-hmm.
and seeing what it takes. And, you know, it's been tough as a parent that normally has tried to make this whole experience easier.
Mm-hmm.
Having him learn how to self-advocate is going to be the better tool
Mm-hmm.
than anything else.
Yep, so the example was having her child participate and be an active member of his IEP team. But honestly, when you say self-advocate, it doesn't get easier when you're an adult to self-advocate. So whether it's paying bills or speaking up in a meeting, it's a lot easier to learn now when the stakes are maybe a little bit lower because there's other adults that can speak up for you. You know, maybe the stakes are a little lower at not paying the bill because then mom will say, all right, well now this is what you have to do to solve it, instead of having to figure that out on your own, or being in a meeting where there are teachers who can give you ideas if you're stuck, as opposed to trying to be an adult now advocating for yourself at work, asking for what you need. So practicing in those lower stakes situations, which actually made me think of something. When we go to our various service planning meetings for kids, how active are kids in those meetings? I see a lot, not very. Why not? They're boring. They are boring, yes. They might feel ashamed, right? Here's all these adults, and the whole agenda is everything that's wrong with me, right? even if the way we're wording it and talking about it is coming from a strengths perspective, that kid still perceives what's happening as all these adults that the other kids at school don't have that are running their lives for them, right? So they come in with that. Why else do kids not participate in those meetings?
Kind of just said it, everyone's running their life,
They
they don't really maybe feel like they have a choice in that matter.
might not feel like they have a choice. The adults kind of just, we walk in, we have our own, we outnumber, we start talking. Was that what you say the same thing? Yeah, we don't ask them to. So again, even when we do, well, and I think CCS does it great. I do some CCS supervision in my home county, and the goals are always in the child's words, and so they do some great things. But are we still maybe falling into some old patterns where the adults are talking more than the kiddo? Right? It's their meeting. Right? So I think that maybe that's hopefully something you all could take away. If you're in that role, is sometimes reminding that hey, you're at the center of this team. We're all here for you, and we want to hear from you. Maybe helping prepare them before that meeting for. Next time I'm going to try to talk less. I'd like you to talk more. So what are some things, and let's make a list. Help empower them to speak in their own meetings. How else do we teach coping skills? Coping skills are those things that we rely on a hard day. Modeling. Giving kids ideas. Sometimes it might be through structured programs, right? Maybe you have some social skills coaches in your area. Maybe teachers are doing that through maybe classroom curriculum. Sometimes just saying it out loud, right? Boy, we had a really hard day, and I don't feel like cooking today, so we're going to order pizza for dinner. That is a coping skill, right? That is a coping skill that you can model and name and share with kids because that is one they might use. Or the coping, kind of thinking about some of the good enough. Maybe the coping skill is, I have 2 big assignments to do this week in school, so I'm going to work really hard on those, but maybe this week I'm not going to clean my room, right? That coping skill of figuring out what's the most important priority and putting your energy there instead of insisting on that other thing. How many parents just want, what do you mean don't clean your room, right? Right? But is that not a coping skill we sometimes do, right? Sometimes we skip those important things because we have something else going on. So teaching those kinds of skills and strategies. Teaching kids to speak up. Teaching them how to talk to their friend, how to recognize when your friend isn't your friend. Right? All of those things are coping skills, strategies. Distraction. How many of us like to disappear into a phone when we need a good distraction? A book, yeah, something, time with a friend. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer 2 years ago, and I had to do 6 rounds of chemo. I played a lot of Toy Blast on my phone and spent a lot of time talking to whatever friend I talked into coming with me so that I didn't have to think too hard about where I was. Because I didn't need to think about where I was. I knew where I was, and I knew what was happening. It wasn't going to make the chemo less effective if I didn't think about how it was working, right? But I distracted myself to get through that experience. And so sometimes facing it also means kind of, I'm going to pretend like I'm not here. I'm going to think about the beach vacation I want to take when this is all over. Anything else on coping skills? Role playing. Good old-fashioned practice. How many of us love role playing? Like, nobody. How many of us acknowledge that sometimes it's really important to have a script in your head of what you're going to do, right? And we can acknowledge that with our kids too. Like, I know this is going to feel so cheesy, and we might not want to do it, but tell me what you're going to say, or write it down on a note card, right? Give them some kind of practice, because honestly, the more we practice, the more likely we are to do it when the time comes. I'm going to put physical wellness on here as enhancing resilience because I think these are some of the best, I think this is the foundation for being able to use the coping skills. But wellness helps us to be resilient. How resilient are we when we don't sleep enough? Not at all, right? How resilient are we when we forget to eat things like vegetables or drink our water, or we just have a steady diet I don't know, Diet Coke and McDonald's. Nobody's ever at their best, right? Like that can be some really nice, comforting stuff, but it doesn't help us be our most resilient. For some of us, it might be exercise. We want to think about physical wellness when we're stressed, to take care of ourselves, while we can make room for some of the healthy coping that can be found in things like chocolated wine, we don't want that to be our primary coping. We want to avoid those negative outlets. Sleep and water are two of my favorite. The role of sleep, right? I just think sleep is the glue that holds me together, being able to be well rested. When we are sleep deprived, we are less emotionally resilient, right? We don't think as well, we don't remember things, we don't problem solve, we're probably grumpy. And it's important to know that teens still need 11 hours of sleep a night. Who knows a teenager getting 11 hours of sleep at night? Not a one, right? Maybe on the weekend, that's right. Yep. And you can't catch up on the weekend, right? We're maybe not going to get to 11 hours, but kind of emphasizing that your teens, right, need some more sleep. Small children need sleep. But the other part is water. How many, we talk about hunger being a thing, but for how many of you can you solve all of life's problems by putting your kid in a shower or a swimming pool? It is so therapeutic, and I feel like we don't talk about that. Like, we don't acknowledge that the way we should, but water has a really calming effect on us. So taking a shower or sitting by the water, if you're fortunate enough to live near a river or a lake, right? Just picture it in your head. Do you immediately feel yourself like getting calmer and happier? So water has a way of helping us relax and calm our nervous system. So if you don't live near water, can you put on a sound machine with water to help yourself calm down? Playing in a swimming pool. My son is a swimmer, and he says that it's one of the few places, and he was a distance swimmer. I don't know who this kid is at times, but he likes to do like the mile swim or the 500 meter. And he says, yeah, you get in there and you just get into a rhythm, and you can't hear anything except the water. And I see some people shaking their heads like, yeah, that's totally true. Right? So you just can't hear anything else. And he says you can kind of turn off all of the world. So, think about water. Think about, when you're looking for an activity for kids to get involved in, swim is a great one because the repetitive motion can be very therapeutic for our brains. But it's also, even on a swim team, you're really only competing against yourself. So it tends to be something very individual and team-oriented. And I'm yet to meet a group of swimmers that weren't genuinely good kids. So that's my plug for swimming. How do you incorporate sleep and water? And exercise and nutrition and all that good stuff? Mm-hmm.
I know when my almost 2-year-old is like having just a really rough day, and sometimes we'll either, we'll put her in the bathtub,
Mm-hmm.
or I have like a little water table.
Okay.
She gets so excited because I bring it in the living room.
Mm-hmm.
Like water doesn't belong in the living room.
Right.
So we put towels around and everything, and she just splashes and goes at it, and literally her mood goes from down here all the way up to here.
Mm-hmm. So for young kids, using a water table, bathtubs, water play is great. What else?
Outside of getting my 11-year-old autistic son in the shower.
Yes.
Let's take a shower. No, I'm joking.
Right.
When he gets in, like, hey, don't be spending too much time. 10 minutes later, have you done anything? Nope.
Nope.
You just stand there. And it relaxes him.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, dude, you gonna pay for that water?
Maybe you can divert it from the activity fund, right? The college fund into the water. Mm-hmm.
I schedule my sleep.
Okay.
Like, or block off that time, because otherwise I'll just fall asleep. So if I'm like sleeping exercise, I just block it off. Because otherwise I will fall.
Absolutely. Going back to that kind of even your self-care, right? Scheduling the sleep. Turning your phone, I know that they can do this on phones where you put it in sleep mode and you don't get any texts. And I don't know if it'll yet like not let you touch it either, but like, right, this is bedtime, you know, and really holding to that. Or scheduling not just I'll exercise at some point today, but knowing when you're going, what time you're leaving.
I work with some pretty severely traumatized high schoolers.
Okay.
And so I talk about sleep, water, nutrition as just like our bare necessities.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like very slowly transition from just asking like, oh, how are you? How's your day going? Like I'll start by saying that when I first get to know them, but very like frequently. And quickly I transition over to just asking about those things. Like, oh, how's your sleep been? Have you drank a lot today? Like, well, it becomes like the same thing as asking how are you? So then we talk about it very normally. So
That's a great suggestion. Talking about working with traumatized teens and asking those questions about how are you doing these things. But I think I'm going to guess that part of that might have been teaching those things, because a lot of times kids who are traumatized might be disconnected from their need to do that. And one of the things I like about all these ideas is some of these are going to work in your house and some of them are just not. And so please take away what works for you and what doesn't. All right, in the couple of minutes we have left, I think we've done this already. I want to stop. I want to stop first and say there's some really great references out there on resilience. And the APA has some great articles and things. And so a lot of what I used today came from their site, but they talk specifically about teens. They talk about how parents can teach it. And the articles, so if you just go to apa.org and type in resilience in their search bar, you'll get all of their stuff. And I find it's written very easy to read, easy approachable, easy to implement. So if you go there and you read those things, you'll be like, hey, that's all that stuff she talked about. She really did get it from here. So use my sources. And this article, the How to Help Teenage Girls Reframe Anxiety, was a really good article as well. In particular, thinking about teenage girls and how they tend to react to stress, and some of the things we can do to help them reframe anxiety as positive. They talk a lot about some of that cultural stuff, about how we view anxiety and say it's all bad and we should avoid it, versus, nope, we want to see that anxiety is real. And I thought, and I was going to say, I should have said thank you, opportunities for questions. So with the time that we have left, what else do we want to know? Did we accomplish some of what you wanted to? Yep.
So, question regarding resiliency. I know this is a very controversial topic, but I'm curious because my almost 2-year-old, she just started sleeping through the night about 2 months ago.
Okay.
We chose not to do sleep training. In your studies, I mean, have you came across anything with like more resilient children if you don't sleep train, less resiliency, anything like that?
Okay, so the question was about sleep training in 2-year-olds. And I think what you're asking is, how might sleep training or not sleep training contribute to resilience? I have no idea. I think what I would say to that question or anything is resilience doesn't happen in a vacuum. So it wouldn't be just your sleep training or not sleep training. It's everything you're doing. And so even if maybe you're doing it wrong in this area, if you're doing 5 other areas right, it's going to come out in your favor. So I feel like don't worry too much about any one thing. Think about the big picture. But if other people know more about sleep training and resilience, please share.
So I have a question. I have a stepdaughter who, she tends to have the most comfort in being in that victim mentality. And so while I'm validating the feelings of that stinks, because that's what we use, that stinks, and we talk about it, but when we go in the direction of finding a solution, I typically can't get her, I can't draw her there, and then I'm getting frustrated, she's frustrated, and it just seems like it's just this endless cycle. Do you have any experience in that, or do you have a...
Sure. I suppose we all do. So the question was, in talking with a young woman, kind of taking a victim mentality, right? And so you validate and you acknowledge it, and you can't get them to that next step to do something about it. Is that accurate? Okay. So how many of us have been there? right? We have the best friend, we have the, right? That's hard. I think two things I would say is when you get frustrated, walk away. You're done. And just give yourself permission to be done, right? You can't, right? We're just going to walk away. We're not there. The thing I tried to remember the most with whatever challenge my kids threw at me is that it took years for them to develop that habit. I wasn't going to fix it today. It was going to take me It was going to take me time to unlearn that as well. I do think there's probably some good information out there on grit and mindset shifting. So I do think that, that might be valuable. That might give you some good tips. I'm going to ask for tips from other people in the room in just a minute. But also remembering that teenage girls, their kind of identity sometimes revolves around that stuff. And so even if you're not solving it in the moment, you're planting some seeds that are going to grow at some surprising point. But, how many, all right, there's a lot of ladies in the room. How many of us remember, like, your friends, you had to have a problem too, right? Everybody had to have a problem at the lunch table. And if you had, parents that weren't divorced, it was like, oh my God, now what am I going to, that kind of stuff. So part of it is don't take, some of it's the nature of the beast. Some of it is planting the seeds. Some of it you may be able to challenge. Some of it they're never going to admit you're right. So you're probably planting way more seeds than you know that are sprouting in places she will never let you see. But other people, what have we done in these situations?
I think maybe asking like what the barrier is, moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
past, whatever
Yeah.
conflict or, problems that she's having.
Mm-hmm.
Even if she can't come up with something, at least maybe it would encourage her to start thinking about what is that?
Yeah. Yeah, using some of that language. It sounds like you might not be ready for solutions right now, but if you change your mind later, I'm here.
Okay, that's a good.
That's on repeat. Yeah, there's a hand in the back to share. I love it.
So I'm going to refer to this as resilience training.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going back to the tying shoe thing.
Yeah.
My son got major beat with tying shoes in the morning. And I call it resilience training
Mm-hmm.
because I question, like, do we let him tie his shoes till he's screaming and crying, or do I just tie the damn thing
Sure.
and leave? Right? Where's the line
Yeah.
where I know that I'm teaching him he can do it on
Mm-hmm.
his own? And also, like, is he doing this so mom ties his shoes?
Sure.
Maybe just get other shoes.
What about deciding together how many times he's going to try it before you help? But you know what? I can say that because, I'm like years past that and I don't have the crying kid and I'm not trying to get out the door. So it's easy to solve problems in this room, much harder at home.
Going back to like the teenage girl, sometimes I'm raising a boy,
Mm-hmm.
teenage boy, and it's just as hard.
Yes.
They asking if they just want you to listen or to help them come up
Mm-hmm.
with a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes they just want to complain. And
Yeah.
that's okay too. They don't want a solution, they just want you to hear them.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yep. Thank you.
With our 15-year-old, back to your question about your stepdaughter, with our 15-year-old, like, I find that he'll be really reluctant or disagreeable or can't seem to comprehend how he's going to be able to get his homework done or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
might be, and that becomes just like it's stealing. What I started doing recently is like tying a preferred item to that issue, like if he'll throw a fit because he thinks he has too much homework, and how am I ever going to get all this done? And I have to do this, and I can't even like access him to work through it. I'll just calmly make, a comment like, I don't know, this sounds like a lot of multitasking, and I know that when you're learning how to drive, that requires a lot of multitasking. Because I know he
Mm-hmm.
wants to get his driver's license, right? And like try and find some common ground with something you really, really want, and let him know you're watching. And until you
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to navigate through this, you aren't even going to talk about the preferred activity that you
Yeah.
really want to talk about. Did I articulate that clearly?
Yeah. That's good kind of tying life skills, right? You want this life skill up here, you got to do this other.
Higher functioning, but
So I'm seeing it's 2 o'clock, and I want to be really respectful of your time and the next group's time. So I hate that I have to cut you all off. Thank you so much. You've been an awesome, awesome audience. Thank you.